Your host today is the SUNY Canton Small Business Development Center, and joining us to introduce our presenters and lead things off is Angela Smith, the Assistant Director for the SUNY Canton SBDC. Angela, I'll turn things over to you. Oh, Angela, I can't hear you. And I promise, I didn't mute you. It wasn't me this
time. I did that to myself. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much, Renee, for the introduction. Welcome, everybody. If you're not familiar with the Small Business Development Center program, just a little bit of housekeeping. We have 22 centers across the state to help you. We are part of a network of over 900 nationwide. We provide free business counseling to startups, existing small business owners, and yes, we also help when owners are ready to exit their businesses. Our free services are made possible by funding that we receive from the U.S. Small Business Administration, the state of New York, and our host campuses. As you probably guessed, our host institution is SUNY Canton, and we're very grateful for their support. The SBDC program in the state of New York has been around for almost 40 years. We're a few years shy of 40 years. Some programs come and go, but our program has been around for many, many years. And we've actually helped some business owners start their business, grow, and also now we're in the process of assisting them to sell. So people can work with the SBDC across all phases of the life cycle of their business. To find the closest center to you, if you want to get started with a business advisor, the easiest way to get in touch with us is to go to newyorksbdc.org and request an appointment online. If you already have an advisor, reach out directly to them. And if you forgot who it is, call the center and they can do a quick search and connect you. I'm in really good company this morning. And before we get started, I want to thank our co-sponsors, the Adirondack North Country Association and the North Country Chamber of Commerce, for helping to promote this event and for everything that you do to support small business. We have over 50 people registered for today's webinar. Exit planning is a very important economic development issue. I've been with the SBDC for almost 10 years, and in my early days at the center, we would get maybe 3 or 4 client projects a year that involved selling a business. But in the last 3 years, our center has received over 70 inquiries, whether it's buying or selling a business, and we know that COVID-19 pandemic has only accelerated the need for some business owners to exit their companies. In rural regions like the Adirondacks, helping business owners plan their exit is especially important because our population is older, and because we know that when we help business owners to prepare for the sale of their business, we increase the likelihood that this business will sell. And this helps to retain more businesses in the region and the jobs that they create. And hopefully, it also helps the owner retire with a larger nest egg. It's important for me to remind everyone that SBDC advisors cannot give you tax or legal advice, but we can share information so you can make the best decisions for your specific situation, which is why we've teamed up with the experts today to help you learn more about the exit planning process and options available to you. I am joined this morning by Rob Brown, Director of Business Ownership Solutions at the Cooperative Development Institute. They are an organization that work on developing startup cooperative businesses or help transitioning existing businesses to co-op models. Also joining us are Jay Ward, CEO, and Kevin Kennedy, new worker owner of Ward Lumber. They will share their worker co-op transition stories and answer some questions. Even if selling to your employees isn't an option that you're considering, the Ward Lumber case study is a fascinating look into a growing trend in small business transition. Danny Delaney from ENCA's North Country Center for Businesses in Transition is also joining me to share information about no-cost and low-cost resources available to support buyers and sellers. Danny will also share some exciting news about new groups and programs that ENCA will be launching this fall. Last but not least, I also want to give a shout out to my colleague Frank Cetera from the Onondaga SBDC. He's our in-house co-op expert, and he works with advisors across the state to advance the Main Street Employee Ownership Act and also cooperative opportunities. We will cover a lot of information this morning, but please know that we will share the presentation and recording with you after the webinar. Without any further ado, I would like to welcome Rob Brown from the Cooperative Development Institute. Rob is physically located in Maine, but we are so excited to have him as a resource working in our region. Rob, welcome.
Thanks, Angela. Thanks everybody for coming. Thank you to the SBDC for hosting this. My name is Rob Brown. I'm going to share some slides and walk through a presentation. So we'll be able to send that out to folks afterwards as a PDF, so you can look back through the slides if you'd like. Everyone always asks that question. We will do that. A couple other resources that we'll share with you throughout as well that will be helpful to you. I'm gonna just jump right in. And is like another, oh, are you seeing, let's see, you're seeing my screen?
Yeah, looks good.
Okay, great. So this idea of exit planning, let me move this out of the way. So the idea of here around exit planning, I'm going to show you some statistics. I think a lot of business owners will see themselves in these statistics that just show the importance of exit planning, considering that part of the arc of entrepreneurship. Lots of business owners have spent many years doing very well at building businesses, but they haven't put the thought into how to exit that business in a way that secures their own retirement and sustains the legacy that they've built and the jobs that they've created over time. So that's what we're hoping to leave you with. In the short amount of time we have here, just set appropriate expectations. We're not going to help you develop an exit plan in the next little bit, but what we hope to do is give you some sense of the questions you should be asking yourself, the considerations you should be taking into account, understanding a little bit about process and options, pitfalls and so forth in that process, and give you a few pointers on where to start. And then, you know, hopefully folks reach out to SBDC, reach out to other service providers that you trust, CPAs and your attorneys and such, who probably know more about this than you realize and could help you if you asked. So I frame this up as planning for tomorrow for business owners. Anytime you're going on a journey, you have to have a plan for it, and trying to exit your business definitely is a bit of a journey. So I frame this out as three sections: knowing what you want, understanding your options, and then achieving your goals. Just a little bit about me and CDI, so you know who's talking to you. We're a nonprofit organization founded in 1994. We are the USDA designated Northeast Center for Cooperative Business Development. So sort of like Angela and Canton, SBDC is a business development center that gets some of its funding from the Small Business Administration. We're a cooperative business development center that gets some funding from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. There's about 23 or so cooperative development centers around the country, operating in mostly rural areas. We work across most sectors, not all, but most sectors and industries throughout New England and New York. I am in Maine, but I do workshops like this all over New England. I have clients all over New England and New York. And we're a pretty straightforward business development center. We offer technical assistance, training, education. We do some policy and advocacy work. So that's a bit about CDI. The program that I run, Business Ownership Solutions, just works with existing businesses and business owners and groups of workers on exploring exit planning options, understanding employee ownership options, and if it makes sense for that business, if it's both feasible and desirable for that business, helping them execute a transition to a worker-owned cooperative. As Angela said, also, I am not a lawyer, I'm not an accountant. I'm not offering legal or accounting advice, but I'm pointing you and getting you to ask some questions of yourself that are necessary and pointing you in the direction of those licensed service providers that you rely on for specific and final guidance that you need related to your business. So what is the key issue here, and how big of an issue is it? This is a survey from the Business Enterprise Institute. They do this survey every 2 years. This shows that 79% of business owners are saying they want to retire within a decade, and fully a third are planning to retire within 3 years. Nationally, half of business owners are over age 50. And in most rural regions, half of business owners are 60 plus. So definitely older, reflecting the population at large. Population of this country is aging, but definitely older than the population on average. And that's great. Retirement can be fun. However, fewer than 1 in 5 of those business owners actually have a written succession plan. So if that many business owners are planning to retire that soon, and yet less than 20% of them have actually planned for that succession and are just waiting to see what happens, that's problematic. This is a basic supply and demand issue. More and more business owners are trying to exit their business. Fewer and fewer people are interested in buying businesses, and that is a potential clash. Just in New York alone, a recent survey, pre-pandemic survey showed that 3,700 businesses close each year due to owner retirement and a loss of 13,260 jobs. That's just in the state of New York. Nationally, that is true everywhere. That the largest single source of avoidable job loss over time in the United States is business closings due to owner retirement. So these are avoidable job losses, but for lack of planning. And if you're just hoping that you can sell the business or your kids will take it over, well, that's oftentimes not a viable option. Only 20% of business listings ever sell, and only 15% of intergenerational transfers succeed over time. So again, making assumptions about selling a business or your kids taking over is a pretty risky bet as well. And then the smaller and more rural the business, the greater the likelihood of liquidation and closure when an owner retires. It's just that much harder to sell a business. The smaller it is, and the more rural the region it exists in. Nationally, this is referred to by many as the Silver Tsunami, this aging baby boomer business owner demographic, transferring an unprecedented amount of business wealth, and that transfer is somewhat shaky at this point. And then add on top of that the past year or year plus that has really caused great uncertainty for so many businesses. It wound up not being as bad as people imagined right at the outset for many businesses. For some businesses, all businesses took some sort of hit, but some did better. Some were driven out of business. But it has certainly created an unprecedented air of anxiety amongst business owners, particularly older business owners who just don't want to go through this again. If they made it through this time, they're probably eager to not go through this again. So the expectation is that the economy, the business environment of the last year, if you made it through that, you're really looking to get out. So it could actually accelerate to a great degree business exits is an assumption being made right now. So where to start on the idea of exit planning? As the saying goes, if you don't know where you're going, any road will do. If you don't define your goals, whatever happens to your business is what's going to happen. It could be liquidation and closure. It could be any number of other things. But if you don't plan, if you don't have a plan and you don't set your goals, realistic goals, it's really hard to meet your retirement goals. So some factors that cause failure, these are, again, things to think about, questions to ask yourself, considerations to take into account. But factors that cause failure, as we're trying to make clear here, lack of proper planning, unrealistic planning, or just no plan at all. It's a self-evident one. Just failure to properly identify goals and objectives. What are your retirement goals? What are your financial needs for your retirement? What are your goals for your family and your children if they are taking over the business, or if they're not taking over the business? What are your goals for the legacy you've built and the business you've created? Do you have goals for your employees? These are all goals that you need to be really explicit about and realistic about and plan for meeting, or else you won't meet them. There can be liquidity issues. It's not that uncommon for a business to be carrying more debt than it is worth at a particular point in time. Could be for very good reasons. Major investments made at a given time, but that just means you need to time those investments, big expansions, new plant or equipment. You need to time those investments so that they're paying dividends outside of the window of when you're trying to plan to retire. Because if you're carrying that debt, it may not have returned to the value of the business at the point at which you're trying to sell it. There could be all sorts of family succession issues. We'll get into that. Inadequate successor management. Just failing to build a bench, failing to build a robust management team that can make the trains run on time in your absence. By not doing that, you are by default devaluing your business. If the business can only operate successfully with you there 24/7, opening the doors, closing it at night, then you have made your business less valuable because of that. It's certainly common for business owners to have either an unrealistic perception of their business value or just no perception whatsoever. They just have no clue and no idea how to do it. And improper deal structure also. Maybe you planned, but it was an unrealistic plan, or just bad structure, too much debt, too bad management, and the thing falls apart afterwards, after a transition. Some of the obstacles for the seller, there's the mortality issue. Owners don't want to think about retirement because it implies, what am I going to do with myself? I give my life to this business, and what am I going to do in retirement? So they just don't want to think about it. An unwillingness to relinquish control and develop successors. Again, that idea of building a management team and investing in the development of management structures that can run a business and can transfer with the business, enhances a business's value. Owners who are constantly working in the business, not on it. The business owner who's always running the cash register, stocking the shelves, doing the books, running orders. Those are not the highest and best use of a business owner. That's what employees are for, and business owners need to spend at least as much time thinking about the development of the business, the future of the business, strategy of the business, and growing the business. The fear of running out of money. What we're talking about here today, just unaware of what the options are or perceived complexity, just means you don't deal with it. And again, the family succession issues, if that is the path. In the end, most of these obstacles are emotional. They're like in the owner's head. They're not practical concerns or practical issues. Each of these can be dealt with and planned for if a business owner is willing. So some of the mistakes that I and other people who work on exit planning or have these conversations with business owners frequently see is an assumption that they already know what their business is worth. I need X amount in retirement to live the lifestyle I want, therefore I want X for my business. Well, that's not how business valuation works. So that's a common mistake. Too busy running the company, the procrastinator's excuse. That'll never happen to me, being unrealistic. Or there's plenty of time for that, more procrastination. So some of these are some of the mistakes that we see business owners making, or ideas that business owners are making. So that's a bit about, again, questions asked, considerations to take into account, mistakes that we see business owners make, understanding a bit about options. broadly defined, there's really only 3 options. Well, there's 4 options, but to sell your business, there really are only 3 options. You're either selling it to some arm's length third-party open market sale, the business is transitioning to somebody within your family, or the business is transitioning to somebody within the firm. The 4th option being liquidation and closure, which I'm assuming if you're attending this webinar, you'd like to avoid. So we're going to talk just a little bit about some ideas around understanding these options. But before choosing any strategy, just to recap, again, define your goals. What is it you need? What is it you want for yourself, your family, your business, your legacy, your employees, your community, whatever it is. You need to define it explicitly, document it, and have a plan to achieve those goals. Understand that selling the business is not the same thing as retiring. It is most common in the sale of a business to anyone that there is still some role for that selling owner to play. Somebody might be willing to buy the business, but you have to stay on for some period of time as a general manager, or at least in some sort of consulting role for some facet of the business. So just understand that somebody comes along and cuts you a check, usually doesn't mean that you're completely off the hook and can take off fully at that time. And understand the difference between ownership, governance, and management. And I'll get more into that distinction a little later. But so just a couple of things about outside sales. This is where a lot of business owners' minds seem to go. When I'm ready to retire, I'll just sell the business. I'll get a business broker and they'll sell it for me. Without understanding the relative infrequency with which that happens, again, particularly for smaller businesses and businesses in rural areas. That said, an outside sale can be the cleanest break and can result in the most proceeds up front, but not always. If you're willing to sell the business, again, keep in mind it's becoming more and more of a buyer's market. That means you're going to make more concessions than a buyer might. It's not as easy as business owners think. It takes as much work, different type of work, but it really does take as much work to sell a business on the open market as it does pursuing any other strategy usually. The most important point I want to make about selling a business openly, open market, third-party sale, is to take into account the potential impacts on employees, customers, and vendors. Once you are public about wanting to sell your business, you're actively marketing your business, very, very likely your best employees have an eye on the door. They're trying to develop a plan B, as are your customers, as are your vendors, because they don't know what the future holds. They don't know who's going to take over the business, in what form, how is it going to be changed. So you're creating a great deal of uncertainty within the business, and that uncertainty needs to be managed very, very carefully, or else it can really harm the business. So understanding and accounting for and making plans to deal with impacts on employees, customers, and vendors is a really critical thing to plan for in an outside sale plan. And then there are options. There are business brokers in some industries and in some regions, private equity, perhaps. Frequently, a competitor is a good option. If you're looking to sell your business, somebody who has one or more similar businesses is a good option. And so how do you have that conversation, or how do you approach a competitor to gauge that interest? The other option is just looking up and down the value chain. Is there a customer that you have that might be interested in buying this business because you as a business are so important to them, or a vendor? Same principle. I've seen this in Maine. I've seen this in some fisheries businesses where fishermen have bought businesses, or marketing companies have bought businesses because securing that value chain was so important to their own business that they were willing to take over a business up or down the value chain. So those are some considerations about outside sales to take into account. The idea of family transitions, they're becoming less common, and nobody seems to think they're going to become more common. to say the least, kids are less likely to do what their parents tell them to do. The assumption that growing up in the family business, quote unquote, means you're going to take it over is just not, it's no longer an assumption as much as it used to be. And there, you know, we're talking about family, right? So there's whole new layers of complexity and emotion involved when talking about, you know, what you've built for a business and what your children might be willing to do with that business in the future. Got to think about unintended tax consequences with family transitions. Again, this is just a matter of planning. These aren't necessarily going to happen, but if you don't plan, they could. So particularly with the state taxes, less so with the state taxes, but particularly with gift taxes, you have to be careful in family transitions that you plan properly, that this transaction is structured properly, that the transition is structured properly to avoid unintended tax consequences that can result in family transitions. And then in family transitions, just being crystal clear about which family members we're talking about and in what capacity. So if you've got 3 kids and you just keep saying, I want my kids to have the business, well, that doesn't mean anything. What does that actually mean? Like, which kids, in what capacity, who are they just going to own it passively and somebody else is going to run the business and they will benefit from that ownership passively? Are they going to run the business? Is one of them going to run the business and the other, right? So there are all sorts of horror stories in the exit planning world about just intergenerational family implosions and toxicity that has come from bad family transitions where there was a lack of clarity around who owned what, who had what role, what capacity did they own it, who was running, who was going to run the business, right? So that has to be a plan, and that has to be very clearly communicated and bought into by that next generation for a successful family transition. And I will say there are lots of advisors who specifically focus, almost exclusively focus on family transitions and the dynamics, helping ensure those dynamics don't happen. The third broad bucket, employee transitions. Some of the options here, there's this idea of entrepreneurial apprentice. This is a bit more of an idea. I'd love to see this developed more explicitly with like supportive resources, but the idea that you're hiring somebody with the intention, the explicit intention that they are essentially apprenticing with you and you're structuring an ownership transition to that person. That, I think that's an idea that holds great promise, particularly for the smallest of businesses and businesses in rural areas. But that idea of an entrepreneurial apprentice, where you're recruiting somebody, bringing somebody in, cultivating them, training them in how to run this business with the explicit intention that you will support them in actually taking over the business. This idea of a senior management buyout, I think that's self-evident. Most people have thought of that. You've got a few managers who can piece it together. We're going to talk about some of the broad-based employee ownership options in just a second, work around cooperatives or employee stock ownership plans. For a few of these, there are some potential tax benefits. At the end of the day, the logic is really valid. Your employees know your business and your customers best, and they certainly have a vested interest in seeing the business continue. So this third piece of the framework of planning for tomorrow, the idea of achieving your goals. So if you've been really good and explicit about understanding what your goals are, setting your goals, being explicit, you understand clearly the pros and cons of the different options, and you've chosen an option that makes sense for your business, then there's the phase of achieving your goals. You actually need to execute the plan. I don't know your businesses and don't know what your options are, and so on and so forth. So just a few key factors of success when you get to this point of execution, how to begin. First and foremost, think like a buyer, right? If you were buying a house, if you were selling a house, your there's lots of emotion and memories wrapped up in your decades of living that house. You know, the backyard where my kid first hit a baseball, and your perception of value of that house is clouded by those memories. What a buyer cares about is that the structure is sound, that the HVAC system works, that the comps in the region justify the offer they're willing to make. That's all they care about. So you need to, if you're wanting to sell your business, you need to think like a buyer and look at it from, step outside and look at it from that perspective. As I keep stressing, identify, cultivate, and lock in your key leadership. Your business with a solid management team is more valuable than your business if you've made yourself the indispensable leader, because the value transfers with that leadership team. And if there's some sort of incentive or equity or gain sharing plan that you've developed to lock those folks in and keep them in-house, all the better. Again, it just goes to the value of your business. That will go right to the value of your business. You got to identify and talk honestly with the full suite of advisors that you need to do this well. Your lawyer, your CPA, talking with an exit planning specialist, perhaps a wealth advisor if you've got a bigger business, and there could be some larger gains and needing to manage that appropriately to avoid unnecessary taxes. So you got to build that team, and you got to be clear with them and honest with them about what your intentions, what your goals are. And then they can help you and guide you in executing those goals. Most importantly, you need to separate your personal finances from your business finances. This is probably the most common thing. And I'm not the IRS. I don't care what personal expenses you run through your business. But if you're looking to sell it, you need to get them out, and you need to get them out 3 to 5 years prior to trying to sell your business. So running the home heating oil through the business, running your groceries through the business, running your cell phones and vehicles and everything else, all those owner perks, it's your business. You can do what you want, but you are devaluing the business by running those expenses through the business, because you're diminishing the profitability. If you spend 20 or 30 years trying to minimize your taxation by diminishing your net income, when it comes time to sell the business, you can't turn around and say, but oh wait, it's actually worth this. The business was actually been this profitable all along. Like, you can't do that, right? And lastly, take a long vacation. If you're looking to sell your business, or if somebody is looking for financing to buy a business, and you can demonstrate that you can leave for a month, and the business continues to run and function well, that just goes to the value of your business. It shows that your business is probably worth what you'd like to get for it. So that's a bit about the exit planning process. Again, quick questions to ask yourself, places to look for advice, considerations to take into account, some pros and cons about various options. The option that people seem to understand the least is broader-based employee ownership. So I'm going to spend a few minutes. I do just want to check my time. So I'm going to spend a few minutes explaining this in a bit greater detail, just so that you understand this better. So we're going to talk a little bit about employee stock ownership plans and worker cooperatives, so you understand what these two models are and have some examples. First off, why consider employee ownership? It sounds too complicated. My employees, they could never do it. They work for me. I know them. They're not interested. They can't do it. Like, those things may be true, but I would argue that the business owner is probably the least likely to answer that question accurately. So it's worth exploring regardless. And then this is a quote from Entrepreneur Magazine. This idea that you're tapping into a pool of ready-made buyers that were right under your nose all along. And again, like I said before, they have a vested interest and they have a stake in the outcome. So it's worth considering this option. And often it could be the most viable option for you. Just to point out, employee ownership it's good for business. It's not a large segment of the economy, but it's not insignificant. There's over 7,000 firms with 13.5 million employee owners. Most of those are ESOPs. Employee-owned businesses, reams of research over decades have shown that compared to conventionally owned businesses, employee-owned businesses, they create more jobs in the good times, lay off fewer workers in downturns, they're more productive, more profitable. And if you think about it, that all makes sense, right? If the group of employees owns that business, that ownership stake, that sense of ownership culture that can be developed is going to lead to a better company. So a little bit about ESOPs, just to understand what they are. They are a qualified defined contribution benefit plan that is invested in the sponsoring employer stock. So they are essentially a 401k plan that is vested only in that company's stock. And they are governed by that same federal law, ERISA statute, as 401ks and IRAs and so forth. So fundamentally, it is a qualified retirement plan. The shares of the company are held in a trust, so there's a third-party entity that you're bringing in to the business, and the beneficiaries of that trust are the employees. So it is indirect ownership, indirect employee ownership, where the shares are actually held and controlled by a trustee. The ESOP can borrow money to buy the shares. That's how these transactions come together. There's obviously no other retirement vehicle, savings vehicle where you can borrow money to buy shares. Those shares are allocated to employees. Usually seniority results in more shares. And then when the employees retire, those shares are bought back by the ESOP, by the trustees. So that's called the repurchase obligation. This is one ESOP here that's here in Maine, one of the larger, more prominent ones. They actually are called Moody's co-worker owned. It's about 13 collision centers throughout the state, large, couple hundred employees. Some of the advantages, again, that idea of a ready-made market for the firm, the buyer that's right under the owner's nose, so to speak. You can easily sell the company in stages. ESOPs are designed specifically to make it very easy to do that. And in fact, I gave the example of Moody's. I think at this point, they're about 49% employee owned, with the Moody family still owning 51% and running the firm. There is no cost to employees. And in fact, you don't even have to tell employees that you're setting up an ESOP until after you've done it. It is really controlled by the business owner. It can be set up by the business owner. There's no cost. It's set up essentially as an employee benefit. And there's a lot of tax benefits for ESOPs. Tremendous tax benefits, and that's what makes them very attractive. On the flip side, the disadvantages, they're very expensive to implement. So anywhere from 75 to 150,000, that's like the normal average. It doesn't get any cheaper than that. It can get a lot more expensive than that, just to put it in place. And then you're going to spend anywhere from $30,000 to $75,000 a year to maintain it. So when you hear about, ESOPs are good for companies of a certain size of employees or a certain revenue, those are proxies. What really matters is cash flow and profitability, because if the tax benefits don't more than pay for these costs, it's hard to justify putting an ESOP in place. Another disadvantage is just there's heavy regulatory scrutiny from a lot of entities, Department of Labor, Department of Commerce, IRS, at both the state and federal level. So usually business owners are trying to avoid regulatory scrutiny from multiple government entities. It doesn't address the need for a management transition plan, and in fact, it can sort of lull business owners into a sense that they've taken care of things, and then all of a sudden they haven't adequately built a management transition plan, a management team. So that can be problematic. And again, because it's a passive ownership, it's indirect ownership, employee ownership, that can feed that problem around the management transitions. There can be less buy-in. And then again, complexity, the law require numerous highly paid outside advisors. So what is a worker cooperative? A worker cooperative is a business jointly owned and controlled by those who work there, and it operates for the benefit of those workers. That is the basic definition of any cooperative, a business owned and controlled by its members, and that operates for the benefit of its members. So whether it's a consumer co-op, a lobster co-op, a worker co-op, a credit union, a producer co-op, they all operate on that same basic definition. But with a worker cooperative, the membership is actually the workers. They're the ones that own it. Some basics. A worker cooperative is a corporation, but it's a very different type of corporation. It is not a capital-based corporation. You can't buy more of the company than anyone else. A capital-based corporation is a corporation where ownership is dictated by your capital investment. Somebody owns 50%, somebody owns 10%, somebody owns 1%. That's a capital-based corporation that we're all very familiar with. A membership-based corporation, which all cooperatives are, is a one member, one share, one vote. So everybody has an equal ownership stake and an equal say, buys one share and has an equal say in certain matters that the bylaws of the corporation would say. It could be a vote for the board of directors, an annual budget, personnel policies, could be various things. It's not the management of the business on a day-to-day basis, but it's some of the big picture governance of the firm type decisions. Unlike ESOPs, worker cooperatives are direct ownership. The workers are buying a share. It's willing buyer, willing seller. The workers want to own it, but they don't all have to become owners. So if you've got 20 employees and 10 of them want to do this, or 15 of them want to do this, and 5 or 10 don't, that's great. Everybody can keep on doing their job under a new ownership structure that just happens to be their coworkers as a worker cooperative. That said, those owners have no guarantee of employment. People still have a job to do. There is still a management structure. Somebody's setting schedules, somebody's doing performance reviews. People have to do their job. Ideally, people are doing their job better than they did before, with more intention, more commitment, because they're now owners as well. The material benefit is the idea that the members get a share of the annual net income, either allocated to them as equity or distributed to them as cash. There's some advantages and disadvantages, and this is kind of comparing ESOPs and worker cooperatives. The advantages of worker cooperatives is the tremendous flexibility. There's almost no regulation. There's a few guidelines that are dictated by the IRS, very simple. So you have tremendous flexibility in how you set up a worker cooperative, what the rights and responsibilities of those members are, what the management structure is, the capital structure, etc. So there's a lot of flexibility. And less regulation, more flexibility just means lower cost. You don't have outside advisors, you don't need to get business valuations constantly. So it's just a much lower cost in terms of that transition cost. It is direct ownership, so the idea, the advantage I feel there is with direct ownership comes a greater sense of responsibility, greater sense of skin in the game on the part of those new worker owners. And then also the idea of shared risk. I think entrepreneurs are a rare breed. Most people aren't cut out for it. Most people are fairly risk averse. So the idea that shared risk makes entrepreneurship more accessible to more people, I think is a fair characterization, and I would make that an advantage. In terms of disadvantages, unfamiliarity. Most people don't understand what any cooperative is, let alone a worker cooperative. And unfamiliarity leads to it feels riskier because it's not clear to you what it is. I put leadership needs under disadvantages. Again, it is direct ownership, so it comes with real leadership needs, and I don't think our society or education system or a lot of businesses invest very well in developing good leadership skills. So that's just what I see in dealing with a lot of different businesses, is there's a lack of leadership and that needs to be cultivated. So there has to either be existing leadership skill sets or a capacity to develop it. amongst the buying group. Again, sense of risk, and then shared reward, right? Like, the flip side of shared risk is there's shared reward. Nobody's going to get rich, but people can certainly have better jobs, enjoy their work more, have greater sense of ownership, build wealth through that ownership over time. There are a few tax advantages that, if people are interested, I can answer more questions about. But the basics are that the net income of that the cooperative itself is a tax deductible entity. So the extent to which it allocates its net income to its members, that is tax deductible. So it has some of the best of both worlds of both C Corps and S Corps. It's got the great liability protections and sort of corporate protections of C Corps, but it is to some extent a pass-through entity like an S Corp. So it's got a sweet spot there that it exists in. Those members are paying taxes on just the amount of their patronage, is what it's called in a cooperative, individually at their personal income tax rate, but they're not paying any payroll or self-employment taxes on that. So that's a 15% or so savings on that income. And the IRS does require a minimum 20% distribution of total allocation to members. So if one member's share of the profits in a given year is $5,000, they have to be given a check for a minimum of $1,000, and the other $4,000 would become equity in the company. So to give a couple of examples, and I'm just trying to demonstrate some examples of scope, scale, sector. What we're trying to encourage here is this idea of a phased exit. Like, make a plan, pursue the plan, give yourself 3 years or so at least to execute that plan. But sometimes it's an immediate exit, either lack of planning or there was a death or disability of the primary business owner and the family doesn't know what to do with the business. And then a third, which is this restructuring for growth idea, where it's actually mid-stage entrepreneurs who are trying to grow the company in a more sustainable way, personally sustainable, but also for the business. So I'll give you a few examples of each. The first, this is retail. It's a big business. This is on the coast of Maine, Stonington, Maine. They have a large grocery store, a medium-sized grocery store, and an Ace Hardware. This is an island off a peninsula off the coast of Maine, a bridged island, but an island. This is one of the largest employers on the island. This is an example of a business owner who is just constantly working in the business, not on it, didn't take the time, didn't plan. When he was ready to retire, hired a business broker, thinking, who wouldn't want to own these stores? And 2 years later, turns out nobody did. So one thing led to another, and we were introduced, and I worked with them over the course of a year or so to design this. This was a very complicated transaction to put together, primarily because there wasn't the proper planning. It could have gone a lot smoother if they would have started a bit before. But this is, a large retail, grocery, hardware. This is a recent transition. This 40-year-old business, t-shirt manufacturing, printing, silk screening business, also here in Maine. Liberty Graphics, very high quality artwork. Like, they're known nationally for their artwork. Lots of national museums, nature centers, so forth, use Liberty Graphics for their t-shirts and tote bags and all that stuff. But again, this was a business owner who did plan a bit for a few years, but definitely imminent retirement at the transition. And so this is about 30 to 35 employees here who now own this business. Very rural. So this is a coffee roasting company and cafe, Rock City Roasters and Rock City Cafe, two distinct but certainly interrelated businesses. This is, I think, Suzanne, the owner of this business, is like the epitome of good planning. She took 5 years, did a lot of work to support her employees and gaining business education, strategic development of the business. Really put a lot of effort into that so that upon retirement, she was done, completely done, no role, because she put the work into it ahead of time. And this is also about 30, 35 employees. At the other end of the spectrum, this is an Ace Hardware in Stamford, New York. 6 employees. This started as a Western Auto in the early 60s by Ralph's parents. He didn't want anything to do with the business. He wanted to be a teacher, left, became a teacher. His mom died. He gave up his teaching career to go back and help his dad run the business. Then his dad died. So he owned an Ace Hardware. He tried to sell this business about once a decade up until about 2015, at which point a customer suggested he sell it to the employees, asked the employees if they'd be willing to buy it. And he was introduced to me, and I helped them buy out the business, but it's very small, different type of cooperative, given that it's so small. But it was a great transaction. They're a really cohesive bunch. This idea of restructuring for growth. This is a landscaping company in Kingston, New York. Very high-end, very high-skilled workforce, high-end clientele, big jobs. 15 years into growing this company, this woman started her in a truck. All of a sudden, she had 15, 16 employees, but she was still the foreman on every job, designer of every project, answer of every client inquiry, completely unsustainable. She was a single mom working 60 to 80 hours a week. So for her, the idea of transitioning to a worker cooperative was to accomplish 2 things: attraction and retention of highly skilled talent, and also to vest them with an ownership stake to create a different management structure that could make her own life personally more sustainable and grow the company more sustainably. So I always get the question, what kind of business is good for this, or who's a good candidate? And really the answer is the same business that would be attractive to any buyer. It's a matter of track record, like stability of cash flow, stability of leadership, stability of legacy, stability of workforce. Is it a good company? Is it a profitable company? If it is, and it has a good track record, then it should be a good candidate for exploring a worker cooperative conversion. And particularly with employee ownership, I want to stress this notion of these distinct transitions, like conceptually, like business owners don't distinguish between these 3 things because they're all doing it all the time, and it's all kind of mushed up in their brain. But if you're going to sell a business, you got to be very clear when you're talking about an ownership transition, which is who owns the company, in what form, what's the transaction look like, what are the terms. That's an ownership transition. That says nothing about the management transition, like who's going to run it. That's why I kept stressing the need for investing in building a good management team, absent yourself as probably the primary general manager or CEO. And then this idea of a governance transition, like who's making the big picture strategic decisions about the firm, the company. These are 3 different things and 3 different transitions that need to be planned for. And it doesn't matter what order you do them in. What matters is that you have explicit plans for each of them, and you pursue those plans explicitly. That clarity that provides is really important. And then just as a practical matter, we do some amount of exploration with a business owner. They're asking lots of questions, doing some reading along with their employee group if they want to go forward. If that sounds good, we get into an assessment phase of deeper workforce education with a steering committee if they're going to take over as a worker cooperative, feasibility assessments and financial analyses and at least an informal business valuation to validate what we're doing. Fall continues to look good, getting to a structuring phase, like a business and financial plan, incorporation, negotiation of terms on a sale, completing a transaction. With all the companies we work with on transitions, we continue to work with them for at least a couple of years post-transaction on sort of mentoring, coaching, education, training, in ownership after the fact, which is always really necessary. And that's the work. So that's the work that we do at Business Ownership Solutions. So I think that's there. That's
great.
what I got.
Thank you so much, Rob. That was a great presentation. If anybody has questions, you can type them in the chat, or we can also, if you want to raise your hand, we can unmute you. Some people prefer to stay anonymous, so feel free to type in your question and Renee can read it out for Rob. As next steps, we're going to take a little break, 2 to 3 minutes, just so you can go check emails or phone calls, and then we will start a short video, which is about 7 minutes long, that shows the story of Ward Lumber and their recent transition. And then when we come back, we will hear about the Ward Lumber case study directly from Jay Ward and Kevin Kennedy. So any questions for Rob at this point? And we'll have another period of question and answers if anybody is unsure at this point what questions they would like to ask. So we'll take a little break, and in about 2 minutes, we will start the video and reconvene at 10, call it 08, and start the Ward Lumber case study.
Thank you, Angela.
Yeah, there is a question I see.
Yeah, Jay, thank you. I'll bring that one up quick. It's from Kim. What happens as employees join the business? Any option for them to become owners?
Oh, I'm sorry. What was the question?
No worries. What happens as employees join the business? Are there any options for them to become owners?
Yeah. So you in the transition, existing employees can decide for themselves if they want to become owners, as I described. But then also in the future, the cooperative would set for itself in its bylaws eligibility requirements. So there's always, a tenure of some sort. It could be a year, it could be many years. The share price. So they can set for themselves those memberships. One of the few requirements of to be a cooperative is that you do have to have open membership. It has to be free and equal to all, and free, not free as in charge, but free, the freedom to join. So you can't have a group of managers form a worker cooperative to buy out a business and exclude all the other employees, is what I'm getting at. You certainly can't discriminate on basic legal discrimination grounds, but you can discriminate on ways that are free and equal, right? So you could say only full-time employees. So you could exclude part-time employees because you're not actually discriminating against anyone in a particular way. You're just saying you have to be a full-time employee, having been employed for 1 year or 2 years or 5 years, and you have to buy a share. And then if they were leaving, then that share and whatever equity they've accumulated would get cashed out over some period of time, a year, 2 years, 3 years.
Very cool. Thank you. We did get a few questions about sharing the slides. We will be sharing the slides shortly after, so you can keep an eye out from that. It's going to come from an email from GoToWebinar, which will also include today's recording, so you can keep an eye out for that. If you don't see it in your inbox, definitely check your spam. My spam folder's been on its game this week, catching things, so take a look in there if you miss it. We had a few folks that need to jump off, but they said it's been awesome so far. Thank you. More information than expected, Rob. Thank you. And Shane wants to know if the video is going to be set up on a link. I'm going to make it play for you in a moment, but we can also put the link to the video that's on YouTube. We'll put that in the chat as well. So Angela, whenever you want me to play that video, I am standby.
Yeah, let's give it maybe a couple more minutes. Rob, quick question for you. I know you showed different size businesses that did transition to a worker cooperative. What's too small to consider this, or factors that would make a business probably not a great candidate for a worker cooperative? Can you touch on that maybe a little bit?
As a legal matter, well, I'll just talk about New York. As a legal matter in New York, to form a worker cooperative, you have to have at least 5 members. So that's a floor. If so few of the workers are interested in doing it that it cannot sort of credibly be considered broad-based ownership, then there's probably a different structure that would make sense to use, an LLC, an S corp, or just whatever the existing structure is. If you've got 20 employees and only 3 of them are willing to do it, that's not broad-based ownership. That doesn't adhere to the legal definition of a worker cooperative. So there are other structures that would be better suited to that. But as a legal matter in New York, it's 5.
Okay. I know you talked about ESOPs and the cost of setting up an ESOP and ongoing cost, right, of managing an ESOP. How does a worker cooperative compare, like that cost to potentially look at transitioning versus a regular open market sale? I mean, in both cases, you need attorneys, you need accountants. Maybe can you share a little bit of information on maybe cost of working with you or other costs that are involved in looking at worker co-op transition?
Yeah, so with ESOPs, so for one thing, a lot of the entities out there who do worker cooperative transitions are nonprofits, nonprofit economic development, cooperative development type entities. So there's some amount of mission-oriented support there. There's often grant subsidies. Private philanthropy might fund a cooperative development center. We have funding from the U.S. Department of Agriculture to do some amount of support. So there is that. There are various amounts of subsidy depending on what type of business and what region you're in. For example, with USDA funding, we can only use that funding in rural areas. Now, by USDA definition, rural means population center of 50,000 or less. So, that's, I live in Maine, so there's only one community in the state of Maine that's larger than 50,000. So, it means more in certain areas than others. But there could be private philanthropy as well. So, but we do charge for our services, and there's a bit of, we have a market rate fee for service structure. If businesses can afford that, we charge it. We subsidize it to the extent we can for those that can't. And I think there are other resources that can support, like SBDC, like Angela, the support you provided to Ward. That's our taxpayer money at work there, and Danny at Anka as well. With ESOPs, there's not a lot of nonprofit ESOP. In fact, there's no nonprofit ESOP practitioners. They're pretty highly compensated specialized service providers, and that's fine, rightly so. But it's a lucrative, both for the service providers and for the businesses that it works for. It's a lucrative pathway, and so you just don't see the sort of costs cost savings that can come from philanthropic support or nonprofit support or public sector support. Does that answer the question?
Thank you so much. I know it's kind of a wide net that was cast in terms of my question, but yes, thank you for addressing it. We will have another opportunity after we talk to Jay and Kevin for more questions. Just to stay on time, Renee, if you're ready, let's roll that beautiful footage.
All right.
Every business is going to go through a transition, either by design or by default, as a way to
the link into the chat for you. And if you want to take a quick 6-minute break or want to watch it on your own, you can do that. Does that work for everyone?
Yeah.
Sure.
All right.
team. We're creating this worker co-op to take Ward Lumber into the future beyond me. I'm fourth generation. We've been here for 130 some odd years. And I don't want to be the one to end Ward Lumber. My daughters have goals and talents that take them elsewhere. So I talked with them before embarking on this and asked how they felt about Ward Lumber changing. There's some sadness, there's a lot of emotions that go along with this, but they're definitely on board.
2 or 3 years ago, Jay came to us and said, would it be something that you guys would want to continue? That way the business wouldn't need to be sold off. Here we are 3 years later, and it happened. It was just an idea, and then it just flourished. It's quite amazing, to be honest.
Employee ownership is important to me because it gives us a chance to keep Ward Lumber in the Ward Lumber family. It might not always be in the Ward family, but we have a culture, we have a way of doing things, and we want to keep that moving forward, and employee ownership is the way to achieve that.
It's a team feeling that, because everybody has a little more stake in the game. People are going to work harder and with each other.
Anything we do, we know we're actually kind of doing it for ourselves, being an owner employee. It's an exciting concept for us. It's a way to keep the name of Ward going on throughout the years and keep us with an employment at the job.
When you have a vested interest in something, it makes you enjoy your job even more because it's not just for the company, but it's for yourself personally. I never thought that we would all be owners of Ward Lumber, so if we all stay and we all continue to do what we do, I don't see things changing in that respect. I'm very excited that we are taking the bull by the horns and we're making all this happen.
They are a really dedicated group of employees, a really dedicated owner who's passing on this business. Anytime there's an opportunity to work with a business to maintain the business, keep the legacy of the business, they have been working so hard to make sure that there's going to be a strong and ongoing employment opportunity.
With the decline of family transitions and less frequent ability to sell a business, oftentimes liquidation and closure, particularly in rural areas, is becoming the more default option. Selling a business to your workers can oftentimes be the most viable option because they're the ones who know your customers best, they know your business best. With equity vested in the workforce through ownership, it gives these workers the opportunity to control their jobs and to control their futures in a way that was never possible before. They have the ability to build wealth through ownership. It's the American dream in action.
This is unlike anything else that's happened in the North Country at this scale with this many jobs that are going to be retained in our community. It's an incredible opportunity, and we're looking forward to this setting a precedent for other businesses throughout the region that think, oh, this is something we could do too, because we saw Jay Ward do it. We saw, his employees take that over and are now worker owners.
We are very excited that this is the first time we are financing a business that is converting to worker ownership and to support the worker owners of Ward Lumber, helping to sustain the economies and communities where we work.
Ward Lumber is the first in the North Country. The employees are actually making history by signing and taking over this 130-year-old business and keeping it in these two communities of Malone and Jay. This project here with Ward Lumber was a huge collaboration between different people, whether it's Jay Ward, of course, for having the idea and the leadership, and then having ANCA, CDI, ESD, multiple lenders come together and kind of all support this one project to bring it to fruition. By having the employees become owners, not only did we potentially help save and retain 50 some jobs, it's 50 families that get to stay in the region.
I really wanted to vest control in owning and running the business with the employee team that works it every day and are part of the fabric of the communities we serve.
We have a good future here. We have a good business plan. I think we can really be successful.
We've garnered a lot of support and enthusiasm for it, and we think that it's just a really exciting thing.
I don't know what I'd do if they weren't around. Their respect for my business and my respect for their business has always kind of been there. And it's this understanding, and we all do better together. You can't put a dollar amount on that sort of thing.
It's important for Ward Lumber to stay in the community because of the presence and the history that is very apparent. I remember years ago they had this giant crosscut of a tree, and it showed all the rings, and in each ring they could date the start of Ward Lumber and certain other history marks with this giant piece of pine. For me, it's a no-brainer to come here and put my business in the community where I live and where I do business with.
When I started here, it was a family business. I expected it to always be a family business, but going forward with the co-op, we're creating a new family, and it will allow this business to continue perpetually into the future. This gives us an avenue to keep it going.
Ah, love that video. So well done. All right, well, welcome back, everybody. And now it's time to hear the Ward Lumber case study directly from Jay Ward, who is fourth generation owner and was behind the successful transition, which happened in March. So very recent transition, but certainly a number of years in the making. So Jay, tell us your story. Please let us know how this happened for you. And yeah, super interesting story.
Thanks, Angela, and thanks everybody for the interest. While that video was playing, I saw some great questions that I hope we can get to and answer. Some of them relate to our transition relative to real estate and renting and those kind of things. So would like to get to that. So the first slide that's up on the screen includes my phone number. That's my cell phone number. I threw it out in the Q&A to Kim, and I want to put it out there to everybody. Please feel free to call me. My email's there as well. We all get a lot of emails, including me. I may not be as timely in response on an email, but please feel free to call. I would love to chat with folks. So a little bit about me. I went away to college, had to leave the North Country to appreciate it, to come back, worked in college admissions, came back in '88 and became part of the business, became the owner of the business. And as of March, as Angela said, I now work for my employee team. I'm a big supporter of the co-op model, which is why I'm trying to put some energy, some effort into sharing the information. Rob talked earlier about how maybe one of the disadvantages is it's not a known thing. And I'll jump into maybe my next slide with that by saying 25 years ago, it isn't my next slide, but we'll leave it there. 25 years ago, I wanted to do employee ownership, and I was told it wasn't doable. And we'll talk about why in a moment. So a little bit from my presentation, who does this apply to? Privately held businesses in any area, but my heart is in trying to reach out to Main Street and rural businesses. I think Angela asked a question about scalability. One of the beauties for me is the worker co-op model can be scaled down, where the ESOP model maybe isn't really realistic for a smaller business. And that was part of what I was told. So a little bit about who really privately held businesses, because as I said in the video, every business is going to go through a transition, either by the way we want it to happen or it's going to happen to us. So the goal is for me and everybody here is to try to make it happen in a way that is most beneficial by planning ahead. Next. So that's my quote. Every business is going to go through a transition, and that is a slide from Ward Lumber in like the 1970s photo. Next. So Rob talked a lot about when, a little bit about why I want to do this webinar is because small business has given me a great career, and I want to give back, and I want to help others learn about this option, because I, Kevin, who's with us here, and others think it's a pretty cool option. Next. So a little bit about Ward Lumber. We're a 130-year-old company, 130-year plus. That's my grandfather, second generation owner, who passed in 1970, passed fairly suddenly. My dad and my uncle became the owners without a lot of planning. Next slide. That is the photo on the left is my grandfather in 1964 with my dad. The photo on the right is my dad and I standing in the very same place in the very same store, holding the photo from 1964. We had an ownership transition that was planned, thankfully. And luckily, because my dad passed suddenly in his sleep last year, but we had made our transition, so there wasn't an upheaval for the business at least. So next slide, I think, is a little bit more about Ward Lumber. So we have 2 locations, 2 lumberyard hardware paint stores, 50 employee teams, 50 employee members, and 15 million in sales, and a fairly modest bottom line. The lumber business isn't necessarily a high margin, high profit industry. So that goes to the worker co-op versus the ESOP question that we'll talk about, or Rob's talked about. So a little bit about me, 50-something year old owner, and while I don't need to retire now, and I'm not, that's part of what I said in the video, I'm not going anywhere, but it was really important to start to plan because I am going to go away someday. I've had a lot of fun for the last 33 years, but I don't think I can have this much fun for the next 33 years. So I had to do something and wanted to plan and not make it a knee-jerk situation. When I started in 1988, I started handing out financial statements to my managers and started going over them with them. And in 1988, a family member said, "You can't tell them how much we make." My response was, if I don't tell them how little we make, the perception is that we make way more. And I think that we all make better decisions with more information. So I guess I was doing open book management in 1988. Somebody subsequently wrote a book about it, not me. But that's sort of the basis of how I've managed the business for the last 30 some odd years. So I mentioned 25 years ago, I had the idea, the vision to have employee ownership. It's sort of my basic philosophy, I guess, is to be inclusive. I was told at the time, no way, can't do it, too expensive, too complicated, by my accountant at the time, who I love dearly. And I was handed paperwork for an ESOP. And when I looked into it, yes, complicated. As soon as you talk ERISA, Rob mentioned, I don't like regulation. I think Rob referred to as business owners. We want to avoid those kind of things, and the expense is high when you get all those highly qualified advisors involved. And one of the things that really clicked with me was the valuation. In order to transition a business, there's often a valuation needed, but with an ESOP, it happens every year. And I don't know about you, but spending money on a valuation does not provide a lot of value to the operation of the business. So those kind of things really steered me away from the ESOP idea 25 years ago. That photo, by the way, is board cutting for our store in Malone in 2000. Next slide. So in 2018, I stumbled upon, thank you, Danny, at ANCA, the worker co-op model by seeing a social media post. And I'm not a big social media person, but on Facebook, I saw a photo of a friend and just checked it out and started learning about the worker co-op model. Subsequently, and this all happened like in one evening, about probably 9 or 10 o'clock at night, I saw the post, and by about 2 a.m., I'm like, oh, this has some real potential. So I learned about the Vermont Employee Ownership Center. There isn't one of those in New York, at least not yet, but they're right across the lake from the North Country. So I learned about them, saw that they had a workshop, attended a workshop, and really figured out, this is something I really want to look into. I have 2 daughters that were shown in the video that have been involved in business, but it wasn't their life's mission to do what I do. So, and they have goals and talents to take them elsewhere, as I said. So I talked to my family, and once they were okay with this possibility, I did some more exploration. Again, via ANCA and Center for Business in Transition, I met Senator Gillibrand when she spoke about the Main Street Employee Ownership Act. And that all sort of made it seem real that, okay, here's a US Senator with this concept. ANCA is very involved. Let's keep talking about it. So I started talking with my employee team. And I can remember the first conversation, where I was, and the response. And I can see Kevin smiling. If you can see Kevin, he may remember those conversations. I talked about the employees are going to own this business, and I'm not going to own it anymore, was the short version. And the short version of the response was, you're going to do what? We're going to do what? Because it is a unique concept, you know, it was it took a while. And I learned afterwards that there was some people that were very shocked and concerned, and it didn't quite sit well right away. We spent some time talking about it. So I guess it's really about education at that point, because this is a unique idea. And we did spend some time, and folks did become comfortable. And out of 50 employee team members, I don't know the latest number, 40 plus. So we have a very high percentage of participation. But the first day I brought it up, I don't know that that would be the case. But that's a little bit about how I went down the rabbit hole. Next slide. So after talking with the employee team initially, I found Rob, who we've heard from this morning, who was a huge resource. Found Rob through Center for Business and Transition and VEOC. We formed a steering committee, which Rob mentioned, part of the process. Kevin was very involved in that process, and the employee steering committee helped to evaluate the option on behalf of the employee team. And we came together eventually with a transaction. Many members of the steering committee and I went to the VEOC annual conference, which just happened earlier this month. I spoke at it this year. I would recommend that conference for anybody that's looking at it. It only happens once a year, so it's not until next year. There are other resources in between, but that was a fun conference. I still remember sitting down at lunch with Rob, with our group. I think we had 9 of us. And after talking to Rob, it was like, okay, this is the guy we got to work with. And we've been working together for a number of years since. Rob brought to us Cooperative Fund of New England. CFNE is a mission-based lender. We're not really here to talk about lending so much, but one of the points I want to make, and I will reiterate, is that there are resources to do this if somebody wants to do it. And a mission-based lender is really important. I've personally guaranteed millions of dollars of our debt for 30 years. With a co-op, a worker-owned co-op, that doesn't happen, because when there are 40 some odd owners, that just isn't part of the situation. And that was part of the shock and fear from our employee team, as I learned people didn't want to put their house at risk or their assets at risk. There isn't that risk in a worker-owned co-op, which is one of the many beauties of it. Once we found a lender, we made a more formal presentation to the employee team, and folks became comfortable and signed letters of interest to say, yes, we should pursue this. We met Angela. Thank you so much, Angela, at the SBDC. Angela was very instrumental in helping us learn about a grant from New York State. So our co-op got a $250,000 grant, which we didn't really fit in the box, right? Our kind of business didn't really fit the mold for this kind of grant, but the state of New York and ESD saw the potential for employee ownership. And I think that was what really got us a lot of points. You know, that all gets scored, and I understand we scored very high, even though we didn't really fit the model. So, as Angela said, in March of this year, we became a 100% employee-owned worker co-op, and I now report to an employee board of directors. I'm the CEO. My job is relatively the same, other than maybe I don't make the ownership decisions, but I get to run the company with our great management employee team. And that sort of brings us up to where we're at today. Next slide. So what's different at Ward Lumber? So I have some cash out. Obviously, when we're talking about exit planning, we're talking about trying to create some liquidity from an asset that many of us spend our life working on and growing. So I got some cash out. We had no debt at the time. Ward Lumber now has some debt, and Rob talked about that process earlier, so I won't go into it. But there is debt to service the buyout. Our employees are now owners and therefore sharing in the profits. I always bonused out our employee team when we were profitable because the team makes it happen. But this really formalizes that process of sharing the profits. As I mentioned, we have a board of directors, 7 employee owners that have the overall big picture 10,000-foot view responsibility, and I report to that board. And we're all learning our new roles, me included, and that's a very fun process. And Rob talked talked earlier about ongoing technical assistance. Rob is helping us in that process as we all learn and grow. What's also different, we have employee owners who have an employee ownership thought process. I will tell you, we had great ownership in our hearts across our employee team. That's what made it successful. Now, that's even a little notch higher if that's possible. We have receivers in both stores that are responsible for bringing in the products that we are going to sell, and they've got to make sure it's the right item and the right quality and the right quantity and all those things. And if not, we make a claim to the vendor. Since we started this process, I have seen the number of claims go up just a tick, and the level of detail of those claims go up. So where maybe something would be overlooked and, well, we'll let that one go. Boy, it's like it matters now, and it's even better than it was, and we were really good at it already. So Rob alluded to the productivity, the profitability, all those things go up, and we're seeing that. Last thing that's different, technical assistance. Again, Rob, I referred to it earlier. For me, for our board, and education for our employee owners. So next slide, I think, is what's the same. One of the benefits of a worker co-op is there's a lot of sameness. In our industry, in the building supply industry, there's a lot of private equity that's come along and wants to buy lumber yards. When PE comes in and these roll-ups buy up businesses in any industry, things change because it's no longer about the employee team or the customers or the communities we serve. It is about the bottom line and starting to package that business for future sale. So with a worker co-op, we all have the same jobs. We have the same culture because we're all the same 50 employee team members that are running the business as before the transition. We have the same customers, hopefully. And I will tell you, we actually have new customers because of this. And we're obviously serving the same community. So there's a lot of what we did before and made it successful continues. And that's a lot about legacy. Rob referred to legacy earlier. We maintain that legacy by doing a worker co-op. Next slide. So a little bit of a summary. A lot of this has been covered, but a planned transition is important. I talked in the video about why worker ownership made sense to me. The employee team makes it work. Rob talked about how employee buyers are a great source of selling the business. I'm a fan of worker co-op versus the ESOP model. ESOP's very successful, but with a modest bottom line. ESOP was too expensive. I wanted direct control with the employee team. In an ESOP, a trustee is often involved making those big decisions. So if a trustee decides liquidation is the best way to transition the business, then the business is sold. I wanted our employee team to have that control after I'm gone someday. That direct ownership was really important to me, direct control. And to explain that direct control, so the employees have responsibility to vote their share to elect a board. Kevin is a member of our board. The employees don't make management decisions and don't get to give themselves raises and any of those kind of things that one might wonder about. We all, as a management team, make the same decisions. We all have the same jobs, but there is direct control in if the business is going to be sold or there's going to be an acquisition, the employee team gets to vote on that. So I want to differentiate that direct control part. 1042, Rob mentioned it a little bit. There are some nice benefits with selling to employees or doing worker ownership in general. Legacy, as a fourth generation owner, legacy is a bit important to me. I didn't want to be the generation that ended Ward Lumber, and what that would reflect on me and the generations before me. Employee ownership, a little bit about empowering the 99%. In my view, there's too much the 1% that runs this world. So this is my little pushback to give our employee team, part of the 99% maybe, the ability to control destiny and build wealth in a way that is rewarding to me. Rob and I did a podcast a month or so ago, and we were talking about rewards, and I was able to recognize that to me is also a reward. in addition to the financial rewards. Lastly, transitioning to employee ownership should not be done for publicity purposes, but I will tell you, oh my gosh, the publicity we've gotten in the last 3 months has been astounding. Certainly in our local market, I've had employee team members and owners share that they've gotten calls to say, I'm going to buy this X project from you because you're now employee owned. So that's good for business. It also creates a whole lot of warm fuzzy in a lot of places for a lot of people that are important to Ward Lumber, stakeholders at every level. So the publicity is certainly a nice benefit. Next slide.
A great competitive advantage.
Potentially. Certainly any competitive advantage is welcome, and this is potentially one. I snagged this slide from Project Equity and my friend Lane at CFNE because I liked how it summarized things. Rob talked about family planning, and that has maybe a legacy benefit, but the other ones are questionable. Acquisition certainly does not check the legacy box. Probably not retaining employees, as he mentioned, looking at the door. The last one, liquidation, checks no boxes for me, certainly. It's always an option, but it was not one I wanted to pursue. So worker ownership, and specifically worker co-op, checks the other boxes. Angela, am I over time?
That's okay. We can kind of combine with the Q&A session. So yeah.
Okay. Next slide. Anything left? So thinking about business owners, this is a real key for the conversation. I know how to run a lumber yard and a hardware store and a paint store really well. Had no idea about doing a co-op or employee ownership in general. I want to stress to you that there are resources. Rob is a great one, CFNE, some of my advisors on here. There are resources. So if you have a dream and have a vision like I did for 25 years, I'm here to tell you that the resources are there to help you realize that dream. And I would like to be a resource. I'm not an expert, but if you want to call me, please ring me up.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Jay, for being a resource and certainly being available to other owners that might be considering this option. For me, when I became aware of the Ward Lumber intention to transition to employees, immediately I recognized in the economic development world, a job is not a job. These are year-round, with benefit, profit-sharing jobs. And there's no way that we wanted to see this company, right, be sold and potentially downsized or closed and liquidated, especially what size, Jay, is the town of, Jay? Like 500 people?
500 people with the cats and dogs.
Yeah, and you employ about a team of 30 at that location?
Correct.
So to me, when I say it's 30, or 50 families that get to stay in the region, it's because when you have, half of your income tied to a business that could potentially close, maybe that forces you to move if you're unable to replace that. We're a tourism-driven economy here, and there's jobs, but some of them are seasonal, no benefits. So to have a company that provides year-round, good-paying jobs is really important in a rural area to preserve those because they contribute to so much of a vibrancy of our communities. So on that note, we'll save questions for right after Kevin. But Kevin, tell us, you guys have an incredible buy-in. More than 40 employees have become worker owners. Tell us a little bit from your perspective what that experience was like.
Well, it's everything's been covered pretty well here about the nuts and bolts of what we went through. I think what's left is really the emotion from employees. 2018, 17, 18. There were questions. What's going on? Jay's getting older. He's losing his hair. What's he going to do in the future? How's that going? And of course, there's concern. I've been with Ward Lumber for 25 years. I've seen a lot go on. Love the family business. Never thought this would happen, honestly, because it was quite a change. But then we started talking, and like Jay said, the first thing we thought when the co-op was brought up was, yeah, right. How's that even gonna look? Maybe we, it's like we thought there's something going on. What are we gonna do? The education's the big piece. Like with anything, the more you know, the less you guess. And we started learning about potentially what this could be. We've got such a great team here. Like Jay says, it's been an open book, so we know how the business is running. We've got a lot of people who have been here for a long time and worked together well and contributed to where Ward Lumber's at. And we started learning that how a co-op really works. The fact that it would be everyone contributing, everyone could own it. It's not a couple of people going to buy the company. Everyone's and that was, Jay was big from the beginning that he wanted it shared equally. He wanted everyone to have input and to be part of this. And so we, again, Rob, taught us a lot. Couldn't have done it without Rob and CDI. They just really brought us along on the education part. And the more we learned, the more it went along. We formed a steering committee of a few of us, and because everyone can't spend all their time digging into the details, we've got work to do. So we had a steering committee that put the nuts and bolts together. The membership came together. They started getting involved and getting interested. We knew how many wanted to do this. We educated the masses, and we just kept feeling better and better about it. And then COVID happened because we needed that. And your first thought is, oh, well, there goes everything, because the business is probably going to shut down. The business didn't shut down. We were essential. We stayed open, and at the same time, we kept pursuing the goals. And we put this whole deal together with, again, like Jay said, with a lot of help from lenders, from SDBC, SBDC, and others, and it happened. We finally got a closing, and we're having we have 85%, I think it is, participation of members who are eligible. 85% of our employees. We all have the same one vote, and we're making the big decisions. We chose to keep Jay on as CEO because obviously he brought the company as far as it is right now. He's doing something right, and we need that continuity. Going forward, the next big piece is still education, because we're not, in general, business owners, and we need to learn how to be. And we all feel better about doing a better job because we have a more stake in the game, but at the same time, we've got to learn our jobs. I'm treasurer of the board. I'm learning. We're all learning, and somewhere down the line, we need to figure out how to manage the place on our own, or how to replace our CEO. If Jay wants to go fishing, so
forever.
Yeah, it's education, and again, we'll lean on a lot of people, but it's really exciting and emotional.
And CDI is continuing to support the team as part of that transition process to learn how to become owners. And Jay, of course, now wearing the hat of teacher to teach you all the things that he knows and has made him successful over the years, I'm assuming.
Absolutely. Yep.
I see that we have a ton of questions and time is running away from us. So do you mind, guys, if we just go to a few questions? Renee, would you read some of those questions for us?
Absolutely. I did want to leave this slide up for a moment. Jay, you had your hand up too.
I do have my hand up. Yeah. So we have a board cutting coming up, which the slide shows next Friday, I guess it is now. And Senator Gillibrand is a confirmed guest. It'll be on Facebook Live, but we'd love to have you attend if you'd like. I threw my hand up because thinking about our audience being mostly North Country, there's something I want to clarify. Ward Pine Mill, the manufacturing division of Ward Lumber, we spun off into a separate corporation back in 2017. Ward Pine Mill is not part of this worker cooperative.
Oh, we just lost something.
That is a separate company and not involved in this worker ownership transition. The other thing I'll mention, there's so many details that Kevin and I and others worked on, $1,000 buy-in and how that all works and our bylaws. No time to cover that, but please call me if you are curious about something. I'd love to chat about it.
Thank you. Angela, were you jumping into questions or did you want me to bring up Danny's slides?
I think I'd like to jump into a few questions. I'm happy to edit out my section and hang back, and we can stay a little bit longer after Danny as well. So I think it's more important to answer questions that people may have, and we can talk about available resource afterwards. If people want to hang back, they'll have that option.
Okay, and I'll also include those slides when we send out an email. So Rob was awesome and answered a ton of these while we were chatting. I will, Rob, do you want to talk about the two questions that you answered?
Sure. Sorry, was I not supposed to do that? I was just trying to be
No,
efficient.
that is fantastic. That is perfect. For folks that get the recording after, they won't see the question. So if you just want to give a quick overview of those two.
Yeah, so somebody was asking about whether or not employee owners continue to take a salary or just get a percentage of the profits. They definitely continue. I mean, they continue as employees in every sense, legally, actually. So they're continuing to get their wages and benefits and as employees, but now they are also getting a percentage of the annual profits, either as equity or as cash in addition to that. So the answer is both, I guess. And then the other question was, that was about, so real estate. Yeah, I mean, the question about real estate and owning real estate separately, I mean, that's true of Ward. There's the two stores. One, the J store is owned by the Ward Corporation, and now the cooperative. The Malone store is a separate family. I'm not sure exactly what the structure, but it's a separate real estate LLC probably. So they continue to make lease payments on that Malone store. They also, Jay brought up Ward Pine Mill. They also continue to make lease payments for a portion of the J store to the Ward Pine Mill store because they're somewhat co-located, right? So there's a bunch of complexities there. So that's normal. Oftentimes it's helpful to a transaction. It's helpful to a transaction. It can be helpful to a transaction to include the real estate because it's collateral. It's the most collateralized element in a transaction, so that can be beneficial. It could potentially put the cost of the transaction out of reach. So these things are all the due diligence that needs to be done. Like you got to follow the facts, right? You got to do your homework, do your due diligence, follow the facts. Form follows function. Create a structure that makes sense based on facts on the ground. So that's important to consider. Those were the two, I think the only two, right?
Yeah, and then I think, Danny, you had a question that you threw in to the entire audience. Did we cover that one, when to start the conversation?
No, I'm happy to sort of pose that, and maybe it could be for Rob or Jay. A lot of business owners we talk to have the question around, like, when do you start the conversation with your employees? They don't want to sort of dangle a carrot out there that might not end up being the way that business needs to transition, and are nervous about starting that conversation. What advice might you have for them?
Rob's probably got better advice, but I'll start. I'm a very open person. I have a hard time figuring out what I'm not supposed to know or something. So when I started to really think about this, I really wanted to be open with my employee team, for good or bad. And for me, the conversation's going to happen, so I wanted to control the narrative by being out there with it and being forthright and saying this is what I'm thinking about and getting that feedback. I suppose if the feedback was totally bad, and then we wouldn't have done it. So for me, it was as soon as I really got serious about this to put it out there, including to other stakeholders like key customers and key vendors. I wanted to put it out there to our customers, longtime friends and good customers, because the conversation was going to happen somehow. So I wanted to address it as directly as possible, that in particular in our business, I'm not going anywhere. This is an ownership transition. Someday I'm going away, but that's not what this is about now. Not that I'm indispensable, but change is hard, and this was a big enough change as it was.
Absolutely.
There was a question about terms from my friend Kim. Can I speak to that?
Absolutely.
So Kim asked, are the terms of debt similar to the terms of financing of a more traditional business sale? From my experience, and Rob could maybe add to, we had a great relationship with our commercial lender for 30 years. Loved them, they loved us. When we met CFNE and we got the financing together with CFNE, it was better. And I couldn't, I just didn't imagine it. But some of the ratios, some of the requirements were more favorable than what we had experienced prior, plus no personal guarantees, by the way. Everything but my wife and kids was guaranteed to the bank for 30 years prior. Now there are no personal guarantees. So the fact that there are mission-based lenders that are supportive of employee ownership, I think then indicates why the terms are better. There are folks that want this kind of stuff to happen. Rob?
I think it's important to understand that most traditional lenders right now can't necessarily fund these types of projects because of the requirement that someone guarantee the loan. And it's just not something that cooperatives are set up to do. There are, in the works with the SBA to hopefully eventually guarantee loans and make kind of mainstream lenders engage in this process. If conversations are starting to happen, but it takes time, right, to change government. But success stories like Ward Lumber are getting incredible national attention and attention within the SBA and possibly even the White House. So these stories are what are going to make the difference, hopefully, in future lending and bringing in mainstream lenders to facilitate these kinds of transitions. So.
Absolutely. And Shane had a nice comment to follow up on that he understands, Jay, how you felt. He is getting some pushback from his father about if it can be done or not. So Shane, I think definitely reaching out to Angela and Danny and then Jay, of course, would be a great step for you. And if you miss any of their contact information, just let me know. You can reply to the GoToWebinar email and we'll get that to you. It'll actually go right to Angela so she can get you connected to the right folks. Shane, thank you for sharing that story with us. Debbie had her hand up. I sent you a message, Debbie, so you let me know if you want to ask that over audio. I just sent you a message over the chat. We had a question in from Shelly. Small business, no employees, independent contractors. Who should I talk to? Advisors? We have 2 independent contractors that want to buy the business. You can contact me. Don't need to discuss now if you'd like.
The easiest way, if you go to newyorksbdc.org, request an appointment, your request will be sent to the closest center to you, and any advisor at the SBDC can help you get started understanding what your options are if you're planning a transition. And it's free of charge and confidential.
Absolutely. One of the great things about our network is that we do co-counseling. So if someone in the area near you isn't as experienced as Angela might be, they can definitely contact her. And also Frank and Onondaga is a huge resource for this. Debbie says, you bet. She's in the car. Debbie, I'm going to try to get you on audio. Let's see. I'm going to try to unmute you, Debbie. You might be self-muted now if you want to hit that red microphone button. Hi, Debbie.
Hey, how are you?
Good. Thanks for jumping on.
Oh, hey, you guys are awesome. Angela and Renee, as you know, attended a lot of your webinars and been privileged to be able to present some of them. And this is by far the most beneficial one I've ever been on. So kudos to everybody. Jay and I have spoken. We spoke a couple years ago, maybe even 3 now, and he had recommended that I attend a workshop in Vermont, which I did. I believe, Rob, I met you there. I'm very excited for what you have done with Ward Lumber. We're not nearly as old as you are. We're 53 years old as a company, about 55 employees, cybersecurity, IT technology. And one of the, right now, companies like ours are selling like hot potatoes at crazy multiples. We do need a succession plan. I need an exit strategy. I'm near Jay's age, and I do want to fish. It's interesting right now. The multiples that people are paying is a little ridiculous, but I know in my heart of hearts that the jobs here would all but very few be gone. So I guess the question I have is Jay and Kevin, when you went through this process, what were the things that didn't go well? What were the things that you look back on and say, we should not have done that, or we should have done something different, I guess?
Debbie, the first thing is we shouldn't have scheduled a pandemic during this transition. For our transaction, that was a really difficult piece, and obviously we're not going to hopefully go through that again. But that changed the financial structure of the deal, and that delayed us. So I'm giving Kevin some time to think about things that we would do differently. What would we do differently? I don't know, Kevin.
I don't know. It just kind of flowed. There were decisions made along the way, and I think the decisions we made were the ones that were right at the time. And I'm not sure. It's always easy to go back and say we should have done, but at the time, I think we did what we should have done.
Wonderful.
Jay's talking about the financial deal changing, and because of the pandemic, and again, it needed to be done, and it was the right thing to do at the time. So I think we did good.
I will expand on the comment about the deal changing, just to clarify. In our industry, the unit cost of everything has gone up, as we've talked. And so our inventory ballooned, and I was building inventory, so the asset got larger. That's the only change in the transaction, was it just became more to figure out how to finance. So that the pandemic didn't hurt the transaction. The one thing, maybe, Debbie, to your point, to your question, I have thought of early on in the discussions, I didn't want to foist myself on our employee team and assume that I would maintain the same role. So I use language like, if you want, I will continue to manage the business. And I created a question. I left it open. And I found out after maybe 6 months, that made people nervous because they didn't want to have to figure that role out. So based on Rob's guidance, I started saying, I'm going to run this business, and I will continue to run this business after the transition. And then I understand the temperature came down relative to that question. Because this, as Rob said, is an ownership transition, not a management transition. And I incorrectly left that as an open question.
That's a great point. Now, one other question that, and it may have been addressed, and I apologize if it was, but at one point somebody spoke about a 51-49 split. Was that just in the ESOP, or is that also an option in this employee-owned model?
That was in an ESOP.
Yeah, it's only an ESOP.
There's plenty of 100% employee-owned ESOPs where the original owner or family owners continue to run it, but what you see probably more often is that the controlling interest of 51% will be held by an owner or a family until they're ready to fully exit. So that's ESOPs are just designed to go like sell 10%, sell up to a third, sell up to 49, maybe sell up to 100, but that's.
But in the member co-op, so right now Jay is an equal owner to Kevin, for example.
I am
Is that
not.
correct? No?
I'm not an owner. In order to take advantage of the 1042 exchange, I was not able to retain a share, which was my goal. I wanted to be able to say I was an owner, but the co-op had a 50% penalty on any patronage that was paid out to me. So I have no ownership in Ward Lumber.
But
very interesting.
We all own one share. We all have an equal vote. If you're a member, you have one share. And we're all equal.
Thank you for the clarification.
You're welcome. Thanks for the
And I'll
question.
be in touch, Jay.
Okay.
Thank you, Debbie. Always good to talk to you. I appreciate
Yeah,
it.
good to hear from you, Debbie. I see your name on my database every once in a while. I'm like, what are they doing?
We're you know, as Jay said, we're post-pandemic, just trying to put everything together and doing well. So thank you again for this webinar.
Yeah, I want to stress a point in relation to this, which is that you know, it plays off something Kevin said and Jay has said and Debbie was just bringing up, that it's important to point out that cooperatives don't run businesses. They don't manage businesses. Like managers manage businesses, right? So that's why we so thoroughly stress and keep stressing the distinction between the ownership transition and the ownership structure and the management transition and the management structure. So it's just important to keep that clarity in mind. I mean, what you don't want is 50 employees designing a schedule, right? you don't want 50 employees deciding product placement in the store, right? Like people have their jobs and they have management roles and they continue to fulfill those jobs and those management roles, and the ownership is separate from that. So I just wanted to stress that. And then one other point, the question earlier about costs, it reminded me to think for a second. So I wanted to highlight a couple other examples. There's the example of all the support that SBDC provided Ward Lumber, and also of Empire State Development making a $250,000 investment to help the employees buy it out. I have a number of other clients that SBDC has really gotten involved and been a great resource in a different way, a highly complementary resource working with me. A couple of companies here in Maine, I work with an SBDC advisor, and he does his role and I do my role, and it just makes everybody more efficient. Also down, I mentioned Railroad Avenue Supply Company, that Ace Hardware down in Stamford, New York. They got funding from a county technical, like a micro grant, county level technical assistance grant for business development that covered all of their legal fees for the transaction and all of my fees for the transaction. So it wound up being at no cost to them. They're very small. It was like they were a good fit for this small program. So I just wanted to, when the question about costs came up, and I just wanted to reinforce the idea that this doesn't happen with ESOPs that I've ever heard of, but it does happen with worker cooperative transitions, that there are public resources, technical assistance grants, philanthropy, and so forth, that can support these transitions and subsidize the cost.
Yeah, great point, Rob. And, you know, most everybody has a local SBDC in their backyard. Our services are confidential, typically always free. And, you know, the way that this SBDC worked with Anka and Rob and Jay, everybody had a role to play. And typically in my office, I prefer to take a role behind the lead co-op developer where we can help with business plans. In this instance, we didn't need to help with financials because the CFO, Debbie, did that heavy lift. But those are places we can come in and help. But also we're aware of the local funding, right, at the local level where Rob serves the entire New England area and may not be as familiar with resources that are local. So again, technical assistance grant, ESD grants, things like that. It's important to engage with a local economic development agency because they can bring those resources to the table and help facilitate transitions. We're at time. I don't want to stop the conversation. If people want to hang back and have more questions, I'm happy to stay. So yeah, do we have more questions, Renee?
We did have one come in from Shane, another follow-up. Debbie had to go though. She has to jump on another call. So thank you, Debbie. I appreciate that again. So Shane said, I know a lot of business owners buy rentals while in business as part of their investments. Curious if that was part of your retirement plan.
So that may be a question for me. I will answer. I do have long-term rental properties. They are owned outside, or they were owned outside the company, and they continue to be. But even if the business owns rental properties, I think they can be carved out of a transaction. I suppose, well, maybe that's not if it's a stock. Our transaction was a stock sale. So my stock in the corporation was sold to the worker co-op. I suppose those assets could be spun off. So I think my uneducated answer is there's a way to make almost anything happen between a willing buyer and a willing seller that fits both parties.
Thank you. And Angela, I didn't ask folks if they wanted to continue asking questions because that was the last one that came in from guests. So we're in good shape there. I'll give folks.
Renee, may I jump in? Rob talked
Absolutely.
about sources, different sources of funding. And while we didn't pursue this, I'll share that we had customers that were really willing to write $1,000 check, and that was the buy-in for each employees. We had customers that had a checkbook out and wanted to write checks. So that speaks to the warm fuzzy. It also speaks to the opportunity for other financing. They would be, I think, preferred shares or Class B or whatever the term is, non-voting, non-employee shares. But there may be other sources of funds available to businesses.
Thank you. Yes, you're more than welcome to jump in, anyone. I know that Angela wanted to go through a few resources. We can send those up in slides, or you can take a few moments. Kevin, Rob, Jay, you guys have first picks at last word. So
my last comment, my phone number is 518-524-0545.
I'll jump back to that slide too. So folks, if they missed that, they have that. I mentioned you will be getting today's slides and the recording. It will come from an email from GoToWebinar. The thing I have not mentioned yet, when we do close down, you will be prompted to complete a survey. There are a lot of questions on it. The ones that we would prefer that you answer are letting us know how today went. In future webinars, you might want to see if there's a specific topic on exit planning that you think would be beneficial. Please leave that in the comments on the survey so that we know. Those are my housekeeping items that I got out. Angela?
Yeah, Danny, do you want to talk a little bit about the Center for Businesses and Transition and some free resources that are in our area? And I think you have some pretty cool programs coming for the fall, right? That could be fit for some folks.
Yeah, thank you so much. If you don't know, I'm Danny Delaney. I work at ANCA, the Adirondack North Country Association, and I help run the Center for Businesses in Transition, which is a regional partnership of economic and community development organizations invested in helping businesses think through these kind of things and make sure that there are free and low-cost resources available to any business owner or aspiring entrepreneur in the 14 northernmost counties of New York. ANCA overall, we focus on a new economy. We're focused on clean energy and food systems and the entrepreneurial economy. Oh, thanks, Renee, for throwing those slides up. Can you go to the next one? Awesome, great. Yeah, so we do things like farm to institution programs, helping municipalities with LED streetlights, and then a lot of our work is focused on small business owners. Typically, we'll help folks anytime, but most of our business owners that we work with are less than 5 employees. Jay is, the Ward Lumber team is a little bigger than that, so that was kind of a fun new thing for me in particular. Renee, can you go to the next slide? Thank you. So the way that the Center for Businesses in Transition works is through a coalition of different organizations who are kind of the boots on the ground liaisons for their region, making sure that we can share resources out to business owners looking to retire and aspiring entrepreneurs. We have tons of programming available. And on the next slide, you can see kind of a little bit of what we don't do. And I know Angela talked about this with the SBDC, but we're not lawyers or bankers or financial consultants or mortgage brokers, realtors, etc. What we do is try to really sort of bring the kind of resources like Rob, like CF&E, like Senator Gillibrand coming to talk about the Main Street Employment Act and sort of build the ecosystem up so that there are more resources for retiring business owners readily available and that folks can access them. And on the next slide, I know we're over time. So there's just a couple resources that you might, I put them in the chat, but I'm sure we can send them out afterwards too. We have a great website for featuring very publicly available for sale businesses. There's a guidebook, a localized guidebook for transitioning your North Country business. So what to think about, what are the financial resources available in your actual county, that kind of thing. And we have about 1 million YouTube videos at this point. If you want to know about a specific thing, please email me because they're not organized in a really great way. So email me, I'll send you back the links to the right YouTube videos that might be of use. And then for the fall, and this is kind of on the next 2 slides, we are starting sort of a COVID response program. Oh, and then we help with worker cooperative development. One of the things that we're looking at, I think, and trying to sort of support, one thing that Jay said was that New York State doesn't have a Vermont employee ownership center like Vermont does, and we work at the state level and with other policy folks in coalition to think about what that could look like, and how can we support resources that extend to our rural area versus just like New York City, which is a really strong worker ownership center. So that's something that we're sort of working at the state level at as well. Next slide. So for the fall, we got a large grant from the Economic Development Administration to start the Center for Pandemic Response. So we have a suite of services, including some that are specific to businesses in transition. So if you are a business owner and are thinking about transition, Renee, in the next slide. For the fall, I'm just going to highlight 2 really awesome things as part of this program that are kind of in both buckets, the Center for Business in Transition and the Pandemic Response Resources. One is if you loved Rob's presentation today and you want your employees or to think, or as a business owner to think more about sort of that employee leadership development, open book management, and he's going to be, we don't have all the details yet, but those will be coming out soon. There'll be a working group focused on that, so you can sort of learn how to sort of build that leadership up internally for future growth and change. And then we're also doing a succession planning working group that'll consist of a couple of workshops to talk about succession planning, more on the sort of public side. So if you're thinking about selling your business publicly, and our friend Kim Mannion, who did the last one for us and also is a disaster consultant at the SBDC, will be helping to sort of do that working group again. And it's only a couple workshops and then some free consultation one-on-one, so it's not a huge time commitment, but it's a good sort of boot camp for getting that work done. So if you need any, and there's a bunch of other things we're doing with the center, so if you kind of sign up, you could also get an energy audit and some other programs too, but I won't get into all of that given the time. So thank you.
Danny, don't worry about it. If folks do need to jump off, don't worry. We will send you the recording, so you'll get everything. Thank you so much, Danny. I appreciate it. Danny's tired because she's working her butt off on all these programs. I appreciate you taking the time and highlighting those. And then I think this is your last slide here for the contact information. And when we do send out the PDF, you'll be able to copy these or click on them. So keep an eye out for that. You won't be able to click on them on the screen right now, unfortunately. Angela, did you want me to bring your slides up quick?
Sure, we can go through them very, very quickly.
There we go. Can you see those okay?
Yes, I can. Thank you. So I think the message has been made pretty clear throughout the presentation, right? So planning, and especially advanced planning, could make the difference between a comfortable retirement or not. There are several drivers of company value. So one of the first questions I usually get from someone who's looking to sell their business is, what is it worth? And the answer is it depends, right? As Rob has alluded to several times, what is your business cash flowing well? If you take on debt, as Jay explained, right? Someone had to buy this business, so now you might be making a profit because your business doesn't have any debt. But if you take on debt, does the business still generate a profit? So these are all things that create value. Are you putting a lot of personal expenses to the business and you're not showing a great profit? That makes it harder to be bankable and to secure a loan. So I won't go through all of these drivers of company values, because I think Rob was pretty clear on this, but the higher you score in all of these segments, the more valuable and sellable your company would be. So that was my message here, is to look at your company in its entirety. There might be areas that you can improve, and when you give yourself time, you can actually increase the value and the saleability of your company. Next slide, Renee, please. In talking about free resources, if you're not ready to talk to someone, you just kind of want to poke around, Biz by Sell, yes, you can list your business there, but they have a really great learning center. They have even a tool, I believe, where you can do a business valuation. Full disclosure, I have not tested it, so I don't know how well that tool performs, but there's tons of videos. You can download their ebook on the steps to selling a business. So that's a great place that you can maybe start if you just want to kind of poke around on your own and learn about the steps or process of selling a business. And then if you go to the next slide, call your SBDC. It doesn't matter where you are in your journey of planning your business sale or transition. Let's start the conversation early, right? So we can kind of help you clarify. Rob referred several times to what are your goals, what are your motivations. These are things we can give you feedback on, things to think about. We'll take your financials and help you test the feasibility of your idea, right? Rob mentioned, think like a buyer. Well, we'll make you think like a buyer by crunching some numbers and going, yeah, you can ask $1.5 million, doesn't cash flow. So these are things that we can absolutely do some, numbers crunching and kind of show you from the perspective of a buyer. Here's probably some questions or pushback that you'll get. So and Kim has done a great job in the strategic selling work group, where you'll be in a position to defend your valuation because you've gone through this exercise of, I am asking $1 million and here's why it's worth that. Educating on the valuation process. At the SBDC, we can help you with a rule of thumb valuation. It won't hold up in court. It doesn't work for transitions like the one Jay just went through, but it's a great starting point to have a conversation about what potentially is your business worth and why. We can also educate you on the steps, right? The whole selling process. People underestimate this all the time. They think when they're ready, they're going to stick a sign in front of the business and that unicorn cash buyer is going to come through town and they're going to buy the business. No way. There's a lot of work that needs to happen, and we can kind of guide you step by step as to first step, second step. We have sample legal documents that some of our smaller business owners can take a look at, and that will save you money on the flip side when you're working with your accountants and your CPA, because you've done some of the work and now you only need them to kind of review it and potentially, put the stamp of approval on it. Funding a business for sale is a huge piece of it. So we can help you develop a business plan, which your buyer's going to need. Pro forma financials, we can help identify. Of course, there's banks and federal credit unions, but there's a ton of economic development agencies that are also available to support transition projects. Professional referrals, right? Again, not an attorney, not an accountant, but I know a lot of people, and I know who works well with small business. So if you're looking for a cooperative expert, of course, Rob is right at the top of our list for a referral, but there's many, many more attorneys, accountants, marketing people. So, and bottom line, we're in your corner, whether you just want someone's opinion or to bounce ideas off. This is what we do. This is what we're here for, to support you. And we work with both buyers and sellers, but never with the same advisor, because when we work with a client, we're advocating for you. And to work with both buyers and sellers makes it impossible for us to advocate for our clients. So we use separate advisors, and therefore, we'll be working for your full benefit. So that's all for me. The last slide is how to get in touch with the SBDC. And yeah, let's keep our businesses local and preserve the jobs that they create, and help owners retire comfortably so they can fish forever.
I know we've talked a lot about fishing. Now I think I might take the afternoon off. We'll see. Thank you for mentioning the appointment form, Angela. When you do jump on NYSBDC and you do get to that form, there are quite a few questions that you need to answer. It's not too bad. It does take a few minutes. That helps us prepare for your first appointment. And Angela's mentioned exit planning a lot because this is an exit planning webinar. But don't forget, we can help with startups. We can help you expand. And a huge role we've been playing right now is with disaster assistance. So keep in mind all of those. I'm going to put our social link in the chat if folks want to follow us on social. Any of the webinars we mentioned today or resources, we do share them on social, and sometimes in a little bit quicker manner than getting them up on our website. Jay, Rob, if you guys want to share your social stuff or want to encourage people to connect with you on LinkedIn, please don't hesitate to do that. You can put that in the audience chat there, or you can send me an email and I can send it to folks in a follow-up email. Again, please complete the parts of the survey that you want to complete when we do shut down today. And keep an eye out from that email from GoToWebinar. It's going to have the recording, and then it's going to have a link to a Google Drive with today's PDFs of the slides. But I think we are in good shape. We only went a little bit over, but it was a resource section, so
super important information. So
no, absolutely.
I'll include some additional just educational resources in that Google Drive. So that I would encourage folks to check that out. I'll put some more stuff in there as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I'll get that out soon. So Angela, I think we're in good shape. I'll let you have any closing remarks.
Rob, Kevin, Danny, thank you so much. Renee, as always, your technical support is invaluable. And we work together. It's the North Country, right? The tide lifts all boats. So contact any one of us, and we loop the